Welcome, friend. Tonight we travel to Angkor, 1128 CE, where the Khmer Empire raises a mountain of stone for Vishnu, and a kingdom's fate hangs on a single sunbeam at dawn. 8 cross-shaped towers were built, burned and buried during the making of Angkor Wat, an enigma that could crown or curse a king. If the light misses, Suryavarman II's legitimacy fractures, and an innocent master builder may not see another sunrise. I am Snorelock Holmes, your calm guide through history's storms and the kind of mystery that solves itself inside sleep. Before we step across the water, tell me in the comments which other historical mystery you'd like me to unravel while you rest. Close your eyes, breathe slow. I'll carry the sharp edges for you. Chapter 1. Rain, Rope, and a Falling Omen. It was a rain-soft night, the kind that persuades you to loosen your shoulders. My small study glowed with a familiar arrangement of comforts. A coal fire ticking in the grate, a kettle murmuring toward a whistle, and Penelope, my tired old beagle, curled into a cinnamon roll on the rug. On my desk, under the lamp's warm circle, I had laid tools and samples for a harmless exercise. Harmless to everyone but the mystery that would find me. I was cataloguing coconut fiber ropes, short lengths, each labeled in my careful hand. Different braids, different ages. A coil from a quarry winch, stained with laterite dust. A length from a temple hoist whose fibers had drunk the oils of a dozen hands. Beside them, thin glass vials holding quarry dust from different places. Powder from a cliff on Mount Mealea, pale and sugar-fine, and a darker grit taken from a temple step where thousands of heels had polished it into silk. Ordinary work for E, the kind of methodical sorting that slows the mind to a safe walking pace. I turned a page in a monograph and ran a finger under an engraving of dancers' apsaras carved in long, lean lines. Another plate showed the churning of the sea of milk, a ribbon of devas and asuras hauling a serpent to stir the ocean of creation. I marked a line. The count of figures might encode solstices and equinoxes. I made a small note. Equinox beam. Penelope snored once, as if in approval. The kettle breathed. The rain outside brushed the window in even strokes. I stood to fetch a cup when fate made its entrance without a knock. Glass clattered. The air jumped. Something black and heavy shattered through my window, clipped the edge of a book, and landed on the desk with a sound that hit bone, the thump of stone. Penelope's head lifted. One ear flopped over. Then she decided the world could manage itself and drifted back into warmth. I set the kettle down and covered the lamp with my hand to reduce glare. On my desk sat a shard of sandstone, hand-sized, its edges scorched black. A char flecked the blotter. A faint smell rose from it, sweet, fatty, like a temple lamp. Ghee, rendered butter, burned in a small, steady flame. I didn't hurry. Panic is a poor tool in a study or a storm. I moved to the window. The night greeted me with rain, the kind that falls straight down, respectful of roofs and sleepers. There was no messenger in the lane, no retreating footsteps, only a smear of dark resin on the sill, glistening like a secret, and clinging to it, 3 brittle strands of brown fiber, coconut fiber rope, fused at their ends. Near the splintered glass, I found a single grain that looked wrong under the lamplight. Clear, glossus, rain. I pressed it with a knife tip. It held. Vitrified sand, a grain once heated near melting. I returned to the shard and breathed in the detail. It had been someone's working surface once, a flat face incised with neat lines forming a cruciform. Not one cross, but 8, arranged around a small square in the center. Each arm measured in regular units, short, repeating marks like teeth. Khmer cubit, I thought, a standard forearm length used to lay out building. In one corner, hair did.
I told you could miss it if your eyes blinked when you breathed.
There was a small glyph, an equinox sign. Someone had nicked 2 lines crossing equal, and beside them a dot as steady as a heartbeat. The edges of the shard were blackened with soot, but not from a stove or hearth. The soot polished easily beneath my thumb. Lampblack, the kind that paints a priest's fingers after he feeds a ghee lamp before dawn. A palm fiber thread lay in a groove cut across the face of the stone, wedged there, stiff with soot, as if stretched tight to hold some calibration. I worked it free with tweezers. It snapped with a tired sigh, old and reluctant to move again. I turned the shard over. At first, nothing. Then, at the right angle, the lamp's light caught what had been scratched with a stylus and barely finished. 2 letters only, or rather the beginning of a name. Vithu. The cut faltered at the curve of the tear and trailed off as if the hand that made it had been called away or interrupted. I said it out loud, test-fitting the syllables to a name I knew from a book and a rumor. Vithu, I murmured, the master of measures. In the rising years of Suryavarman II, a king who took the sun into his name, one master builder was whispered about more than most. He did not write poems. He did not lead elephants into battle. He measured. He aligned stones to the breadth of the sky, and Angkor Wat, the great temple to Vishnu, needed someone who knew how to invite the sun to thread its heart at the right moments. I stood with the shard in my palm, feeling the faint grit of its incised lines under my thumb, and the rain counted on the sill like a clock. Something had been built, burned, and buried in that far country. 8 crosses, char, vitrified sand, a smell of lamp oil, a name, and the equinox. A spring equinox when day and night are equal, when a beam moves through a temple like a word spoken at the right time. The rain deepened by a degree, the way sound does when a cloud shifts. I felt the weight of a deadline take its place in the room. Meet the Humans sought an appointment note at train platform, but the kind the sky keeps without writing, sunrise, when Suryavarman II would stand to see if the sun honored his temple. If it missed, the stone would be blamed, and the hands that guided it. When fear walks before a king, hands are tied quickly and throats dry faster than ink. I tapped the shard once on the desk, a soft, deliberate sound. "All right then," I said to nobody. "If this is what I think it is, someone is asking me to find the truth before dawn. Either Vithu has confessed onto this stone, or he is calling for help with a language I can read. Rope, soot, line, and sun." Penelope opened one eye and closed it again, satisfied that my voice hadn't risen. The kettle sighed. I reached for a towel and pressed it to the broken pane, a temporary patch. Outside, a cart's wheel rattled far off, and then silence returned to the lane, the kind that loves old neighborhoods and working dogs. The shard cooled the skin of my palm. I noticed another detail: resin marks along the groove, oval smears left by fingertips. Two impressions echoing one another, as if the same hand had seated the thread twice. Habit. A person's habits cling to their tools even when they think they're being careful. I filed that away and looked again at the cruciform plan. 8 arms around a heart, built to be destroyed? Why would a builder make such a thing, then burn it? Unless burning was the point. Unless the earth was meant to remember. My lamp pulled light over the desk. The city beyond my window slept. The shard waited, the way certain cases do, both silent and loud. Rain, rope, and a falling omen had asked for my attention. I gave it gladly. Chapter 2. The shard speaks of sun and king. I set the shard on a clean cloth and took up a magnifying glass. The lines of the incised plan were precise, cut by a hand that trusted a straight edge. Each arm of the crosses carried tick marks, spaced evenly. A layout rule, not decoration. The tiny equinox glyph was no accident. It was a tag for a mind trained to think in seasons, not just in stones. The palm fiber thread had left a faint polish where it had lived in its groove. I ran a fingertip lightly across the face. You can't feel accuracy with a finger, but you can feel care. This had plenty. The faint smell that rose from the shard was unmistakable now that I had a memory to pin it to. Ghee lamp smoke. Sweet, clean, a little nutty. The kind of flame that keeps a shrine's corner alive through the night. The black on the stone was not hearth soot, it was lamp black. Finer powder made when oil burns without much wind. It clung to the groove the way chalk clings to a seam in a slate wall. I let the glass travel across the back again. The scratched Vaithu waited where I had seen it. The stone had also picked up lines radiating from that spot, superficial scratches dulled by a thumb afterward, the way someone rubs away a thought when they decide not to write it down. I breathed out and let the room fill with the sound of rain. This was Angkor Wat, I told you softly, as if we were both leaning over the desk. The largest temple in the world. A mountain of stones standing in water, built as an image of Mount Meru, cosmic mountain where gods live. 5 towers for 5 peaks, mount for the cosmic ocean. Galleries carved with epics. It faces west, which is rare for Khmer temples, and many believe it aligns with the spring equinox. On that morning, sunlight threads a path through doorways and touches the inner sanctuary. If the beam lands true, the universe and the king agree. I placed the shards of coconut fiber on a dish. Coconut fiber rope is strong, and it stiffens when soaked in oil. I touched the resin smear I had collected from the sill and smelled my fingertips. A bitter, tree sap note. Resin helps hold rope against stone as a makeshift clamp, and it flees heat, leaving that shiny ghost. The vitrified sand grain sat like a frozen tear. You don't get that without heat intense enough to put sand on its knees. At a house fire, something deliberate, something ceremonial. In recent years, I read of new things found around Angkor with instruments we would have called magic if we hadn't built them ourselves. LiDAR, a kind of laser mapping that sees through jungle. Those maps drew spirals west of Angkor Wat's moat, long earthworks that looked like coiled ropes. They found, too, the ghost of towers that had existed once and then had gone, buried deliberately. 8, charred at their foundations, deep. Some scholars called them mistakes, Others called them nonsense. A few, the kind I prefer, called them clues. The name on the shard gave them all a human face. Vithu, the master of measures. He didn't write poems, but he may have written these lines into earth and sky. The 8 crosses on the shard arranged around a square felt like a plan for something temporary. Test towers raised fast and then removed. The equinox glyph said when. The soot said how. I let the stakes arrive in my voice without letting fear sit in it. If I am right, a man's life rests on what these lines knee. The king, Surya Varman II, strong, hungry for proof, needs the equinox to bless his temple. The nobles are restless. The borders churn. Thailand, Champa, and Dai Viet always do. If a beam of light misses a carved center by a hand's breadth, the inspector of omens might call it treason. And when fear wants to make an example, it chooses a master builder who can't defend himself in court as easily as he can align a gnomon in wind. A gnomon is the upright in a sundial stick that makes a shadow. Everything with alignment begins there. A vertical line, true to gravity, that makes the sun speak in shadows. The groove in the shard was a home for a string that could true up a gnomon. And that tiny equinox mark, Vishuva, the Sanskrit for equality, had been put there to remember which sky the instrument must speak to. I thought of Bharvadev by name then, because every serious case has a shape, and within it, a pressure point. Bharvadev, Royal Ritual Inspector, ambitious. Pious in the way a sharp knife can be pious. Precise and unforgiving. I had heard the kind of man he was from the shape of his edicts in a book. He read omens as a profession and as a weapon. If he could claim the alignment impure, he could purge rivals and step closer to the king's ear. I pictured him holding a palm leaf scroll like a blade and reading doom with perfect pronunciation. I returned to the shard's face. 8 crosses, each arm measured. The center square tiny and plain, like a target that refuses drama. A palm fiber thread glued into place with soot and resin, meant to be pulled tight and true. The lampblack was exact, as if laid by a soft cloth, not slopped. This was not some saboteur's backroom scribble. This was a craftsman's note. Either Vithu is confessing, I said, or he is asking me to read what others will not. He scratched forth on the back of a working note as if to sign his own name into a fire. The clock he gave me isn't my wall clock, it's the sky. The deadline is sunrise on the spring equinox. The punishment for failure is not a bad review in a journal, it is an execution pit. I placed the shard against my forehead, the way a monk presses a prayer to a doorpost. The stone was cool. The rain outside softened until it felt like the sound came from inside the walls. I let my breath lengtheth a fraction. Calm is a tool. It makes details hold still. There are times when a case arrives by letter, sometimes by a knock at midnight. Tonight, it hurled itself through glass, bringing resin, rope, soot, heat, and a name. I considered the room, the kettle, Penelope, the shards of my window, the shard of someone's courage. Then I nodded once at the empty chair opposite mine, the way you might nod to an unseen client sitting forward with worry in their hands. I accept, I said. Let's go to Angkor. Chapter 3, Smoke to Mist, and the Causeway. My work before a sleep case is as precise as measuring a nave. I pin the waking clues in place so they do not drift inside the dream. I took a small tray and laid the shard upon it, nested in cloth. I set beside it the grain of vitrified sand, the resin-smeared glass I had salvaged from the sill, and the 3 coconut fibers. These were my anchors, facts heavy enough to come with me. I dimmed the lamps until the room fell to a gold dusk. I took down my pipe, one I use only for certain journeys, and filled its small bowl with my own blend, tobacco cut fine, a little valerian for gentleness, a dusting of poppy for depth, and the slightest brush of nightshade to loosen the doors but not the hinges. The mixture is mine alone, learned in careful increments over years. It does not care for theatrics. It encourages quiet roads in the mind. I lit the pipe and let it draw steady. Blue smoke curled like a ribbon laid back into its box. On a small copper plate I pressed a cone of incense, nothing too bright, just a thin stickiness of frankincense to carry the edge of the ghee lamp smell forward so the dream would find its shape more quickly. Near the chair I placed a blanket over Penelope. She sighed and adjusted their paws with an old dog's choreography. With the shard in both hands, I sat. My chair knows me as well as any old friend. The leather hummed its small sound when I leaned back. I closed my eyes. Thumb and forefinger met the way some meditators will recognize. I did not chase sleep. I invited it by naming what I wanted. To the axis where stone meets sun, I whispered. To Angkor, to the equinox, to Vithu if he still breathes. My breath moved in a tide, in, out. The kettle's hiss became something else. A water over stone, the way a wide moat speaks when anything touches it. The pipe's smoke thickened and slowed until it felt like mist that had learned patience. The bristle ends of the coconut fiber softened in my grip, and then, in the way dreams like to show their hand, became a palm leaf's rib under my fingers. The rain's drum on the window thinned until it was a line of cicadas far off. I held the shard closer to my chest and felt its weight tilt, not down, but forward, as if gravity had changed its mind. The chair fell away, not sharply, not with a dop, but like a dock giving way to a flat boat. The smell of frankincense folded into the sweet burn of ghee, and the clean mineral of wet sandstone came up to meaty. I did not open my eyes at once. There is power in letting the new world arrive on its own terms. The first thing I felt was heat that had not yet reached me. Promise of a sun that would need a path cut for it. The second thing was open space. When I opened my eyes, I stood on stone that walked out over water. The western causeway of Angkor Wat is a patient thing. Broad, straight and deliberate. The moat on either side mirrors the sky and holds the temple as a mountain is held by the ocean in stories. The hour was that blue that happens before anything admits daylight. Lotus leaves lay like green plates on the black water, and their edges trembled at insects I could not see. The silhouette of the temple, 5 towers like peaks of a mountain, beyond other mountains, rested against the pale above them. Sandstone under my feet held last night's rain in its pores and gave it back as a smell of warm bread and earth when the air touched it. Behind me, the West Gate's gallery sat quiet, its bas-reliefs asleep in shadow. Ahead, the long line of the causeway drew a perfect invitation to a door shaped like a frame within a frame. I lifted the shard. It was with me, felt like a cool promise in my hands. The vitrified sand grain was a hard star in my pocket. The coconut fibers tickled my palm. All around, the temple's day was beginning, but without hurry. A drum thudded once, the way a heart tells you it is still there. Somewhere to my right, a boy yawned into his sleeve and began to carry a pail living with candle flames. Ghee lamps which smelled through a broken window, a world away. A monk's low chant unwound into the air like a thread. It went on, even when he paused for breath, as if the temple itself was carrying the note. I looked for the pressure of danger. A temple before dawn welcomes you, but politics do not sleep. To my left, near the workshops, torches moved. A shape of men, wearing the stillness of guards, stood, and then flowed forward as one. A copper brazier glowed in their midst, the coal beds smothered with herbs, so the smoke was thick and fragrant. The brazier told a truth. Someone had come to test omens with performance as much as with faith. I said the names out loud to settle us both into the right story. This is Angkor Wat, I told you. The reign is Surya Varman II. The spring equinox is due. The central sanctuary waits for the sun's thread. 8 cross-shaped towers have been built and burned and buried. The master of measures may be under accusation. And there, somewhere in those shadows, walks Bhavadeva, inspector of omens and arrangements. Penelope was far away now, but not lost. I carry her like a talisman, a reminder that breathing steady isn't a luxury, it is a skill. I stepped forward along the causeway. Every footfall was both new and remembered, as if the stone had expected me and made room in its story. The air tasted of wet leaf and oil flame, with a mineral that makes your jaw ache a little, the way a good quarry does. The light at the horizon felt like a held breath. I reached the inner causeway's threshold and paused. I bent and touched the stone with 2 fingers, and then my forehead, including myself in the day, as if it were a meeting to which I had been invited rather than a building I had come to measure. Then I straightened, held the shard to the first suggestion of light to see if the equinox tag would comment, and let my eyes go still. Somewhere beyond the wall, a cart rolled on wet soil, and I thought of the tracks I would find. Somewhere under the earth I stood on, I understood there would be ash and char, and, if I were lucky, the remains of stakes burnt halfway through, temporary things that once held perfect lines and then offered themselves to fire so the permanent work could be clean. The sun was not yet risen. The beam had not yet tested the heart. Vithu's name sat written in soot somewhere between this world and a shard on my desk. I set my shoulders, which is to say, I relaxed them. Calm as a tool. The temple exhaled. So did I. And the investigation began. Chapter 4, in which ash marks a spiral and the guards breathe omen smoke pre-dawn, lay over Angkor Wat like a held breath. The western causeway stretched ahead of me, broad and sure, its sandstone blocks still cool from the night. The moat mirrored the paling sky. Lotus leaves trembled at the edges as if listening. Beyond the causeway rose the temple. 5 towers black against the light, shaped like the tight buds of lotus flowers before they open. I could smell wet earth and ghee, the clarified butter used for sacred lamps. Somewhere drums sounded from deep within the galleries, a slow pulse that told the body to rise even before the sun did. I stepped from stone to stone as if crossing a river. Monks passed with bowls tucked against their ribs, saffron robes quiet as the breeze. Their chant drifted in a low ribbon, words of Vishnu's 1,000 names flowing like water around the pillars and carvings. Workers moved too, but with a different hush. Their feet were bare, their hands were full of chisels or wrapped palm leaf rolls. They nodded to one another, but did not speak. The air was gentle and expectant, and yet, under it, I felt a line of strain, like a string pulled taut beneath a silk cloth. The line of strain had a name: Bhavadeva. Royal guards patrolled the workshops with their spears level and their eyes sharp. They wore sashes stamped with the inspector's seal. One unfurled an edict on palm leaf and read aloud to a group of artisans. By order of Bhavadeva, Royal Ritual Inspector, all impure alignments are to be purged, all seditious structures recorded, razed and buried. Any who interferes will be judged an enemy of the rites. His voice echoed off stone. No one argued. Men and women kept their heads down and made their chalk lines anyway, but I saw the flinch in their hands when a brazier passed near. The brazier was copper, polished, and fed a precise blend of oils. The smoke was heavy and sweet, meant to test omens. Bhavadeva liked the theatre of smoke. I looked toward the west, where the causeway reached the gate, and then beyond it, past the moat, towards scrub and soil. There the ground had been combed with long rakes in spirals, wide, patient circles that reminded me of ripples from a stone tossed into a pond. The spirals were faint in places where rain had come, but fresh marks lay over older ones, a palimpsest of circles. I left the causeway and crossed the bridge to the earth side, where palm trees stood in a loose grove. A tamarind grew nearby with its pods in clusters like little commas against the leaves. I knelt at the spirals. Ash dusted the ridges. Not the wild grey scatter of a random fire, but a thin, deliberate coat that settled evenly. The ash smelled faintly of ghee too, and something sweeter than wood. The last breath of lamp oil mixed with burned resin. I set my fingertips to the soil. The pattern was unmistakable. Rake marks in arcs of constant curve, concentric and careful. The center of the spiral had a shallow depression, hard as a baked brick. There, driven and broken off, I found the stump of a hardwood peg, charred at the tip. I eased it out and rolled it between finger and thumb. It left a whisper of black on my skin. Next to the peg, the ground had fused in a few points into little glass beads. I plucked one and held it up. It caught the weak light. Vitrified sand forms when heat is intense and close. Not a stray cooking fire. A strong, directed burn. A frayed length of coconut fiber line lay coiled and partly buried under the ash ridge, the way a snake buries its head when it sleeps. The fibers were dusted with lampblack that stained the weave. I tugged gently. It resisted and then came free with a soft hiss of grit. Not sabotage, I whispered to myself. The word felt wrong here. A controlled fire. As if to set a memory into the earth. The chant from the galleries deepened for a moment and then receded. I could hear the bleed of a cart axle. I stood and looked along the ground. Tracks cut through the spirals, cartwheels narrow and deep. The tracks led away from the field toward a fenced area beyond the tamarind grove. I followed at a calm pace. Guards paced the fence line. Inside the fence, men hauled earth in baskets. The hole gaped like a dry mouth. It was a pit, fresh, measured, and far too deep for a simple latrine. They had the look of men told to finish it before sunrise. A worker, mouth tight, glanced at me and then away. A guard called, "Back to it." His voice was official, but the gaze that met mine was momentarily human, wary, and tired. He recognized authority in how one walks. I recognized fear in how he did not grip his spear, but spelled the name of fate with it in the dust. I moved along the fence. On the gate hung a seal, stamped in wax and pressed with Bavadeva's sign, and below it a notice, "For Judgment." The letters curled like snakes over the palm leaf strip. Rumor travels faster than carts. It whispered around the moat that Vithu, the master of measures, chief architect, had been taken. Some said he had confessed to impurity. Others said he had vanished. I watched the men deepen the pit in steady rhythm. It was small, too small for a foundation. It was an execution pit, should the omens fail at sunrise. The guards did not name it Sot, but soldiers know the shapes of death before commissioners speak them. If the sun did not pierce the central sanctuary clean at equinox, the blame would fall like a blade. Vithu's neck would wear the edge. A tall man in a dark-dyed dhoti swept an arm toward the pit as if presenting a gift. His jawline was square. His nostrils flared like a horse sensing lightning. He held a copper brazier in one hand and a case for palm leaves in the other. The ash line on his forehead was perfect, a practiced emphasis. Bhavadeva, in person, moved along the fence with little steps that wasted nothing. His attendants unrolled more edicts behind him, the way peacocks trail their feathers. He paused to smell his brazier like a man testing wine. He tilted the oil bowl to make the smoke denser. A guard brought forward a small gnomon, a simple vertical post with a base. A gnomon is the upright stick of a sundial. It makes a shadow that tells you where the sun is. A priest set it in a portable frame. Bhavadev watched the thin shadow with an intent too sharp for pre-dawn. The look said, "I do not read shadows, I arrange them." Across the moat, a different scent rose above the ghee and oil, the faint caramel of palm sugar in the morning porridge stalls. I let the gentler notes anchor me, while I observed the sharper ones. The mind rests better when both exist in the same world. I crouched again over the spiral's center and pressed my finger to the glass bead. It was tiny, like a seed. It proved heat had been focused here. The charred peg told me something had been fixed in place and then burned away. The frayed line told me measurements had been pulled across this field. The ashes' even spread told me it had not been chaos. It had been conducted. I slipped the bead of vitrified sand into my pocket. I rolled up the frayed fibers and tucked them away as well, a small coil of proof. The cart tracks still led toward the pit. I followed them with my eyes and then with slow steps, but did not cross the fence. "Not yet, sir," a worker said under his breath, one row away where men made chalk marks on a slab. They say Master Vithu used crosses. They say he burned them. His voice tried to be matter-of-fact and failed. The guard did not notice he spoke. The man touched his chest 3 times with his knuckles, a sign of protection. "Some structures are meant to live only a night," I said softly. A simple sentence can slow a frightened heart. The chant rose from within the western galleries, a steady line of sound. I turned from the fence and walked back toward the temple. The great gate swallowed me in its cool throat. I entered the shaded halls, where apsaras danced along the walls and devatas looked on with close interest carved into stone. The floor held the echoes of bare feet, silent and many. Columns repeated into distance like trees along a river path. "The 8 cross-shaped towers," I murmured, letting the words settle in my mouth like stones in a stream. "Built, burned, buried." My voice barely disturbed the air. It did not need to. The temple itself was listening. Behind me, a guard's voice carried faint. "Bhavadeva says the old marks are seditious." Another answered, "The sun will judge. At sunrise, we shall see." We would see more than that. The sun would reach through a gate at equinox if the axis had been set true, if Vithu's measures held. I breathed in the cold of stone and the sweetness of ghee, and I let my shoulders settle. Panic is a blunt blade. It damages the hand that wields it. The situation was dire. A man's life and the course of a king's legitimacy depended on a single shaft of light doing its work at first breath of day. But panic was a poor tool for a detective. I took a breath and walked deeper, toward the drafting hall, where those who draw the world into lines try to keep its edges from fraying. Inside, the day had not yet broken. People were awake anyway. Chapter 5, in which Mealea trusts her hands, and I hold the Vishuva ring. The drafting hall was a forest of columns and chalk lines. Floor grids had been laid down in white cords, each line a measure, each square a thought. Palm leaf manuscripts sat in neat stacks tied with string. Charcoal sticks lay beside bronze compasses and reed pens. The hall hummed with a kind of hushed arithmetic. People moved around one another with the grace of those used to sharing the same narrow ribbon of space and time. She stood near a carved lintel where apsaras floated, her back to the shadow. She had long black hair in a practical braid, a chalk smudge on her temple, as if a small cloud had paused there. Her eyes were wide and bright, in a way that can either viz fear or focus, and sometimes both at once. She held a palm leaf roll under one arm and a string of measuring knots around the wrist. "Mealea," I said softly. Names steadied people. They reminded them who they were. She looked up, startled that I knew her. I smiled a fraction and kept my hands open and still. "How?" she began, then shook her head. "The master. He spoke of someone who walks in the space between nights. He told me if I saw a stranger with soft eyes and a hat too warm for here, I should speak." I tipped the brim of my deerstalker, absurd and sensible in equal measure in this climate, and moved closer. "You spoke with him before." I let the sentence trail. The guards were nearby. Words had to be shaped and then set free only when they would not cut. She stepped backward into the deeper shade behind the carved lintel. The apsaras above us seemed to keep counsel. "Master Vithu said not to fear the burning," she whispered. "He said the earth must remember." "Tell me that again," I said, slowly. "And with your hands, if you like." Sometimes hands remembered what lips would not risk. Mealea set the palm leaf roll on a low shelf and drew lines in the chalk dust with her finger. "There were 8, she said. 8 towers in the shape of crosses. Her fingertip marked a small square and then drew 4 arms from it, a cruciform plan. She repeated the drawing 8 times in a circle around a larger square. They rose overnight like bread. Master Vithu had teams prepared. He marked positions with knots and cords. We set the stones not with the care for things that stay, but with speed for things that teach. I watched her hands. They were quick and steady. And then, on the appointed night, she said, and her own breath slowed as she remembered, they were anointed with ghee. We placed bowls of oil at the base of each cross. Priests walked between them, chanting Vishnu's 1,000 names. He said, "We give the night a body so the day can find itself." Then he struck the first flame. The towers burned, that destroyed but offered, so the ashes would settle into the ground. He said the sun must find the center once, perfectly, and then never lose it. An instrument meant to die, I said. The words fit neatly. She nodded, a short, sharp movement. Bhavadeva came 2 days later and spit on the ash. He said it was impure and seditious. He ordered men to dig and haul. He took Master Vithu. Her chin lifted a fraction. He has people who believe his smoke. Some are just afraid. Where did they build the crosses? I asked. Mealea glanced toward the west through a window where the sky was brighter now. In the field beyond the moat, she said, and some close to the galleries. He drew them in a ring. Here, here, here. She tapped places on her mental map, then reached for the palm leaf roll and untied it. He made me keep this, she said, and pressed the roll into my hands. Inside was a small bronze ring, heavy for its size, etched with tiny marks. A pointer slid along its face. The word Vishuva was incised near one notch, the Sanskrit for equinox. The edges bore minute notches corresponding to the sun's height at various times of year. It was a portable calibrator. Inside the ring, almost hidden, were engraved numbers in Khmer cubits and the star-like symbol for the equinox. She also gave me a tiny plumb bob wrapped in soot-streaked silk. A plumb bob is a weight on a line, used to find true vertical. It is a way to let gravity tell you what straight is. On the silk, someone had sketched a plan. 8 crosses encircling a central square. An arrow pointed toward the western spirals I had just walked. He kept this at his belt, she said. When the guards came, he looked at me, and he looked at this, and he said, "Mealea, the temple must be born straight. If they twist the story, set it right. Give this to the stranger if he comes, he will understand." And then he let them bind him. He didn't fight. He said the proof would rise with the sun. "Proof is my preferred companion," I said. I turned the bronze ring in my fingers. The natches caught the low light. I slid the pointer to the Vishuva mark and felt the small click as it settled into place. It was a tactile sound more than an audible one, the way a lock feels when it finds the proper key. Mealea's mouth tightened. They say if the sun misses the mark at sunrise, he will be killed. They dug a pit, she added, as if the words needed to be spoken to become real in the open air where they could be dealt with. "I saw it," I said. I made my voice a steady plank she could stand on. "Listen to me. The 8 crosses were a betrayal. They were a tool. They taught the earth the line it needed. Then they accepted their end. That kind of tool isn't crime. It is sacrifice. We will show it. Footsteps sounded in the corridor. A pair of guards walked past the doorway. One paused, peered in, then moved on. His spear haft tapped the stone gently as he went, counting beats. Outside in the larger hall, the chant shifted into a new register. The drums matched it. "How will we show it?" Mealea asked. "The inspector brings smoke and scrolls. He twists words until they sound right to frightened ears." "Smoke can be smelled," I said, "and scrolls can be smudged. Truth has its own scent." I lifted the small plumb bob. "We will need this, and your hand for a line steady and brave. We will also need the king's eye." Mealea swallowed. "Diva Karapandita can call him," she said. "The elder listens when I whisper. He knows the old rites. He reads the stars without moving his mouth." Her respect for the Brahmin's mind was clear. Respect well placed is a good sign in a student. It means the foundation beneath her is true. "We will seek him," I said. I slipped the Vishuva ring onto my finger briefly, feeling the cool metal against my skin. It had the weight of decision. I pressed the plumb bob's silk-wrapped bundle to my chest once in thanks, and then tucked it carefully into an inner pocket where it would not swing. Mealea exhaled a breath she had been holding for perhaps 2 days. It came out as a lengthened sigh that softened her shoulders. "You speak like you have been here before," she said. "In a way," I said, and let a small smile play at my mouth. "History and I have arranged a habit. It breathes, I listen." Her eyes flitted past me. A tall figure's shadow stretched long along the floor as he stepped through the far arch. Not Bhavadeva, but one of his lieutenants, bearing a brazier whose scent reached us before he did, clove and oil and smoke. Bhavadeva used clove oil in his charcoal blends. Clove clings to the nose. It makes smoke seem heavier than it is. I nodded to Mealea. "Walk," I said, "as if we are only fetching chalk." There is a corridor near the west wall carved with the churning of the sea of milk. We'll speak there, where devatas listen kindly and guards lose interest. We stepped into the flow of the hall. People who did not want to be seen had learned to look like people who had no reason to hide. That is a skill built from practice and fear and, sometimes, faith. As we reached the relief of the churning, the torchlight there flickered and we could see carved bodies straining. Devas and asuras, gods and demons, pulled opposite ends of the serpent Vasuki, coiled around Mount Mandara. They churned the cosmic ocean to bring forth Amrita, the nectar of immortality. I put my hand near the edge of the relief where the tail left the frame. The stone was cold and smooth where many fingers had passed over it. The Nenga's scales caught the light like ripples on water. "Hold the plumb bob," I said to Mealea. Her hands steadied around the tiny line. Torches bloomed brighter. Footsteps quickened. Guards were sweeping the galleries. Chapter Winch, in which the Naga corridor keeps our secret and the light draws a line. We slipped behind a pilaster where the light died. The air was close. The smell of ghee smoke drifted from a torch set in the sconce. A guard's spear tip scraped the stone near Mealea's braid. The sound was keen, a line drawn on a slate. She did not flinch. Her hands held the plumb bob as if it were a sleeping bird. I lifted the bronze ring from my pocket and turned it so the Vishuva notch lined with a thread of dawn light that slanted into the corridor from an east-facing window. It was not the equinox beam, but it was honest light, and it engaged with anything true. I slid the pointer and waited for the tiny click. The ring steadied in my palm like a coin about to become a promise. "Now," I said softly, "let the plum fall." Mealea unwrapped the silk and let the small weight settle. It drew the line of gravity down through the air. The weight touched the stone floor and made the smallest sound, a chime too quiet to be heard, only felt. The line hung still. I looked across the corridor to the opposite pilaster and ran my thumb along the stone at waist height. It came away grey with fine soot, not new torch soot. Deliberate marks, small and purposeful. I brushed a section clean with my sleeve. There, revealed, was a dot no bigger than a sesame seed. Soot pressed into a tiny pit. I moved along the pilaster and found another, then another, each a memory point. "Memory marks," I murmured. Mealea leaned close. "Master Vithu said we should whisper to stone," she said. "He said stone remembers better than we do." Outside the corridor, the guards' sweep continued. Their voices murmured, then rose as one called to another, then hushed again. I could smell clove oil again in the smoke from a brazier being moved past. The note cut through the ghee sweet like a sharp herb in a soft stew. It did not belong to the workshop. It belonged to Bavadeva's travelling theatre of omens. I held the Vishuva ring up so its edge lined with the shaft of light. "The 8 crosses," I said quietly, letting the logic settle, the way pebbles settle in a jar under water. They were marked structures to be used and kept. They were gnomons, vertical indicators, set up in a circle. Together, they formed a great instrument, an array, to calibrate the temple's axis with the sun on one precise date. To make the alignment undeniable, the towers were burned, and their ashes fell into the ground. The charred remains buried themselves at measured depths where no later hand could move them without moving the earth itself. I traced with a finger the line the sun's beam would take along the corridor when the day was fully born. The line would travel this relief and strike the sanctuary's heart only at equinox, when the west-facing temple caught the sun's blade straight. Angkor Wat is unusual in facing west. Many Khmer temples face east, but this one faces west to honor Vishnu, and perhaps in a funerary way for Surya Varman II, who would become one with the west-setting sun. The planners knew this. They designed the beam's path like a thread through a needle. "If Bhavadeva can make the beam seem to miss, he declares impurity," I said. "Then he strips Vithu of honor, and power shifts to him, the inspector who saved the rites." I could hear in my head how he would say it. The tone, the cadence, the pause for effect while smoke curled from his brazier. He wore devotion like armor and used it like a blade. Boots thudded outside. Torches threw flapping shadows of devas and asuras tugging at the serpent. I stepped forward and pressed my thumb to one of the soot memory dots, hard enough to leave a faint impression of skin oil. This mark was not a recent invention. It sat exactly where a line from the Vishuva ring and plum would meet if aligned to the temple's intended axis. A guard's face appeared around the pilaster edge. He searched the shadows. I let my jaw relax and my eyes soften, the way someone looks when they have been standing reading for too long. Mealea bowed their head over the plum bob like an apprentice chastened for slowness. "You there," the guard said. His tone was official but not cruel. State your purpose. Measuring for chalk marks, I said. My voice was calm and faintly thick with sleep, the way a man sounds early who has not yet fully given himself to the day. I tilted the bronze ring so it flashed and then went dull again. Tools make you belong. Move along, he said, eyes flitting to the ring and away again. Bhavadeva inspects soon. He lifted his spear just enough to show he could and then withdrew. We waited until their steps faded. The silence that followed had a different quality. Men kept working. Birds re-entered the soundscape with quick jabs of call near the windows. The dawn was burning higher, and the air warmed, loosening whatever had been clenched in it. We turned a corner and found, leaning against the wall, a portable gnomon set in a small base with 3 short legs. It was a test stick men used indoors to practice alignments and teach young apprentices how to read shadows. Someone had rubbed resin along the underside of one leg so it would grip stone when pressed. I crouched and touched the resin smear. It had 2 overlapping arcs, pressed twice by the same finger. The ridge of one fingerprint crossed a ridge of the other, at an angle left to right. The impression angled inward, not outward, as a left-handed handler would make when bracing the small tripod with his right and pressing with the left thumb to fix the base. Bhavadeva is left-handed, Mealea said, as if reading my thought. How do you know? When he takes arms, he uses his left to lift the bowl and his right to hold the brazier, she said. The old women make small faces when he does this. They think he is showing off his difference. The observation was precise. The conclusion was not an accusation, just a fact. He favored the left. That mattered when a smear pointed the way anger does. We moved along the relief. On a shelf sat a palm leaf scroll tied with a strip of dyed fiber. I loosened it. Inside, someone had traced a misalignment in careful charcoal strokes. A line slightly off the true axis. A shadow laid where the sun would not go on the equinox. The drawing was clear and wrong, a lie told by a neat hand. I put my nose to the palm leaf and inhaled. Clove oil. It had been mixed into the charcoal to make it stick to the leaf and bleed a little around the edges. A theatre trick to make a line seem older than it was. Workshop soot smells like wood and ghee. This smelled like a spice drawer. I rolled the scroll up again and tucked it back where it had been. Evidence is sometimes best left for the one who planted it. Catching a culprit with his own tools in place has a satisfying neatness. The deadline was dawn, Mealea said. She looked toward the brightening doorway, but Bhavadeva told the guards he may judge before full sunrise. He says the beam need only approach to show its intent. He is trying to move the goal. Then we will move faster without appearing to hurry, I said. I let the Vishuva ring rest against the plumb bob. The 2 touched with a tiny clink. We need Divakara Pandita. We need the king. And we need to give the beam a mirror and a bowl and a reed to make its path clear, even to men who like smoke. A small smile touched Mealea's mouth. It did not quite stay, but it visited. The elder is near the palm leaf pavilion, she said. He reads at this hour. We left the Naga corridor with our breath quiet and our steps sure. The world outside had become silver at the edges. The temple's 5 towers stood more confidently now in the brightening blue. In the distance, beyond the moats and groves. The land widened flat and green. This place was full of lines, rope lines dragged by thousands of hands to move stones from Mount Kulin, water lines cut through the earth to bring and take away, chalk lines that taught workers where to put their feet. All those lines converged here at an axis a man was accused of darkening. I touched the pocket where the ring and plum rested. The metal felt cool and exact. I did not rush. Speed increases mistakes. Care sends men home to their family. Chapter 7, in which 8 fires become one line. The pavilion of palm leaves was a rectangle of shade beside a lotus pool. The water lay still, except for the occasional twitch when a small fish tasted the surface. A dragonfly practiced stillness on a reed. The pavilion's floor mats were woven in a pattern of diamonds, and the air there was cooler by a degree that made the body understand generosity. Divakara Pandita sat cross-legged with a stylus in hand, an elder whose eyes collected details and stored them neatly. His beard was fine and white. His shawl draped cleanly over one shoulder. A low table beside him held a stack of palm leaf manuscripts, weighted by a smooth stone that had the feel of a river's gift. "Elder," I said, "I need a mind that hears the sun." He looked up. He took me in at a glance, my foreign jacket, my hat, my hands with ash under the nails they had not had yesterday. His mouth softened at the edges, the way a man smiles without moving his lips. "You carry neither spear nor brazier," he said, "so your hands may be useful." I knelt and unfolded Mealea's silk on the mat between us. The soot-streaked cloth showed the ring of 8 crosses around the central square and the arrow to the west. I placed beside it the bronze ring with the Vishuva mark and the small plum bob. From my pocket, I set down the glass bead I had taken from the spiral field. Beside it, I placed the frayed coil of coconut fiber stained with lampblack. Divakara Pandita's eyes sharpened. "Ah," he murmured, "Vitu's habits." He touched the ring with one finger as if greeting an old friend. He came to me when he first imagined this. He said, "Master, I wish to make the earth remember a path. After we teach it, I wish for nothing to remain that can be moved by unkind hands." I told him that if he could do so without insulting the gods or frightening them, he would be a part of a conversation we have been having for 3 centuries. He touched the soot marks on the silk with a kindness reserved for a pupil's work. "Then you know what the 8 crosses were," I said. "Yes," he said. "They were an array of gnomons, 8 small mountains raised for one night only. Their arms allowed cords to be drawn and anchored in precise directions. The fires were clean. The ash marked positions not with disorder, but with the clarity of something that has finished its task and gone to rest." He looked toward the west, but Bhavadeva finds impurity where he wants to find power. He will argue the gods dislike ashes. He will ignore that the gods like clean thinking. "You see the deadline," I said. "Sunrise equinox. The west-facing temple will draw a beam. Bhavadeva intends to skew the reading with a portable gnomon and a false scroll. The scroll smells of clove oil. The resin smear on the test gnomon is pressed twice by a left hand. He is left-handed." I tapped the small resin smear on my own sleeve, transferred there from my earlier inspection. It was faint but present, a little tack on my cuff. Divakara Pandita nodded faintly. "He will say the beam misses by the width of a student's error. He will declare that Vidu brought ruin on the alignment. The king will have to act publicly. If he hesitates, nobles will call him soft. If he acts and kills a just man, the gods will scowl. He needs both proof and a way to save face. He turned the glass bead between finger and thumb. You plan to give him both? Yes, I said. I drew lines in the dust on the mat. I circled the western spirals. Clue 1, I said. Spiral rake marks, a charred peg in the center, a bead of vitrified sand, a frayed line stained with lampblack. That tells us heat was focused to fix positions. The peg anchoring a temporary stake. The spiral field used to smooth and test lines in a wide area without leaving permanent stone that could mislead later readers. I drew the 8 crosses around the central square. Clue 2, I said, placing the bronze ring so the Vishuva notch pointed toward our makeshift west. The Vishuva ring used to calibrate the sun's altitude at equinox, the plumb bob to find true vertical soot memory marks on paired pilasters that match the ring-plumb relationship. These confirm the axis was tuned with care. The 8 towers were not mistakes. They were a single instrument folded into separate pieces. When they burned, they collapsed into their own footprints. Their ashes and charred pegs remained 21 meters deep in some places, beyond casual tampering, a foundation of memory. I sat back and let the conclusion be simple. Because these clues point to a planned ritual instrument, what I'll call the 8-fold fire array, rather than to malice, the narrative of sabotage fails. Someone forged a misalignment to frame Vithu, and that someone prefers clove oil in his charcoal and presses resin with his left thumb. Divakara Pandita looked long at the bronze ring. You speak plainly. Good. The king will not tolerate riddles today. He will respect that you name things. He lifted his gaze to mine. We will bring him to the sanctuary at sunrise. We will reconstruct the proof in miniature. We will not shame him. We will give him a step to take that looks like leadership and feels like justice. A breeze moved across the lotus pool. The dragonfly took off and drew a thin, erratic map in the air and then set down again as if satisfied. Mealea stood quietly at the edge of the pavilion, her hands folded. She looked small there, but her wrists were strong. Speak your fear, child, Divakara Pandita said gently without looking toward her. He had watched many apprentices swallow their worry. He had learned to pierce their quiet without making them bleed in public. I fear I drew something wrong on his silk, she said. I fear I will hold the plum crooked. I fear my fear will show. He turned that calm gaze on her at last and allowed himself the smallest smile that reached his eyes. The gods forgive hands that tremble when they act. They only frown at hands that do not act because they prefer to be praised. He looked to me. Her hand will be true enough. We were quiet for a moment. The quiet was not empty. It contained the entire plan in unspoken form and something else, an acceptance that we would not control every variable. We would control the ones we could, and then trust stone and sun to finish the work. Divakara Pandita touched the stack of palm leaves beside him with his stylus. I will send a runner for the king. Suryavarman II is decisive. He will come if the matter feels like state and not squabble. Call it state. It is state, I said. If the equinox fails in the public eye, his legitimacy folds. A rumor, weaponized, can topple a throne more quickly than a battering ram applied to a gate. I had seen it in Rome and on ships. in deserts and in cities built like grids. The lever is the same. The fulcrum is belief. He gestured, and a young man came, light-footed, palms pressed together. Divakara Pandita spoke quietly. The runner was gone before the elder lifted his stylus again. "Tell me one thing," the elder said, looking down at the soot memory marks on the silk with fondness. "What did Vithu call his device?" "He did not give it a grand name to me," Mealea said at once. "He called it the fires that teach." I considered and nodded. "We can call it the eightfold fire array when we speak to the king. He will like the shape of that. It is a defensive phrase. It is a name for a tool. He can bless a tool." Divakara Pandita's mouth twitched. "Words can be tools," he said, "and sometimes games. Today we will use the tool version." He stood in one smooth motion that belied his age. "Prepare what you need. A reed, a small mirror, a bowl of water, a chalk to make the beam's path visible to those who prefer to see with their eyes. And bring that resin smear." His eyes glinted like a man who counseled kings, and also enjoyed those small moments when a trickster is made to trip on his own cord. I gathered the items in my mind. We will need a polished bronze mirror to catch the beam and cast it gently to the water bowl to make a bright thread on the surface. We will set a reed as the miniature gnomon at the remembered center point. We will use Mealea's plum to settle it. We will chalk the beam's track on the floor where the stone has been swept, so even men who like smoke more than light will see the line's truth. Divakara Pandita put 2 fingers to his forehead and then to his heart. "I will bring Suryavarman." He looked toward the sanctuary. He named himself protector of the sun. Today, the sun will protect him back. The drums in the galleries shifted tempo. The chant lifted, then leveled. The smell of oil thickened. The equinox approached like a slow arrow. The air carried a sensation both heavy and light. The feeling one has standing at a river's edge when a ferry pushes off. Movement begins, whether one is ready or not. I wrapped the bronze ring and plum carefully in the silk again. I placed the glass bead back in my pocket. The spy scroll with clove oil would remain where we found it. It would hang itself in public in an hour. I looked at Mealea. "Your hand steady?" She blew out her cheeks in a tiny wordless laugh. "Steady enough," she said. "Good," I said. "Then let us make a line the sun will agree with." Chapter 8, in which we set a gentle trap for the sun. We moved through the galleries with purpose that did not look like hurry. Purpose can be quiet and still be strong. The central sanctuary waited ahead, a room whose heart is a point that everything else kneels to. We passed carved lintels, Indra on Airavata, elephants and lotus, and more apsaras smiling into time. The floor stones had been worn into shallow bowls by 10,000 feet. Those bowls held the last of the night's cool, a comfort that shared itself up through the skin. At the west gate, a pair of monks swept the floor with bundles of twigs. They didn't look up. The sweep's rhythm was a gentle metronome, marking the minutes before the sun would have its say. I knelt and brushed my palm over the stone where the sweep had already cleared dust. It was smooth, latticed with faint tool marks from long ago, each pass of the mason's hand a memory caught in mineral. We gathered tools close to hand. A reed from the pool outside, cut cleanly, would serve as our miniature gnomon. I trimmed it with a small knife and touched its base to my tongue, the taste of green and faint bitterness. A polished bronze mirror came from a tray the temple used for lamps and ritual. It showed my face in a blurred, honest way, a man awake enough to do needed work but not excited by the need to perform it. A small bowl of water I filled from a clay jar near a pillar. The water remained still. Even the air seemed to respect the moment and chose not to breathe too loudly. Mealea carried a piece of chalk no wider than her thumb, and the plumb bob wrapped in its familiar silk. The silk was stained and dear, the way a craftsman's handkerchief becomes part of his hand. "Here," I said, touching a point on the floor indicated by an almost invisible nick in the stone. Ghost of older measurement, it lay at the exact spot where the beam at equinox would want to stand a moment before it ran on. "Set the reed." Mealea knelt and pressed the reed into a small clay pellet she had brought. She placed the pellet on the stone and looked to me. I nodded. She unwrapped the plumb bob and let it swing over the reed and then rest against it. The reed adjusted to the line the plumb gave. There was a small patience in her hand that would have made any teacher glad. I set the bronze mirror against a pilaster at a low angle. When the beam came, it would glance off and strike the water in the bowl, and the bowl would throw a blade of light gently across the stone. We would chalk that path not in a greedy way, but lightly, enough to show without shouting. Divakara Pandita arrived with 3 attendants. He walked with the pace of a man who does not show the world when he is eager. Behind him walked Suryavarman II. He wore a gold diadem with a central jewel that held the room's light, as if it enjoyed the job. His body was still and contained. He did not need to throw his weight to be seen. He was seen because he was himself, and because vessels filled with purpose give off a kind of calm heat no brazier can mimic. Bava Dave followed, handsome in a way that comes from symmetry and polished by performance. He held his copper brazier like a reliquary. His mouth had a thin ceremonial smile that he could dot or raise like a curtain. A sealed palm leaf case hung at his side. He signaled to 2 guards who brought in the portable gnomon on short legs. When they set it down, I watched the left hand that pressed the base to make it stick. The thumb left a sheen of resin that caught the light for just a moment and then dried dull. Protector of the sun, Divakara Pandita said, bowing only as much as necessary to show respect without wasting time. We stand at a hinge. The rites desire clarity. This man brings a demonstration that may aid your eye. He tilted his head toward me. Suryavarman II regarded me without blinking. It was not unkind. It was like a tiger deciding if the deer before it was a deer. "Speak plainly," he said. "I will," I said. Vithu, the master of measures, is accused of impurity because 8 temporary towers were burned and buried during construction. Those towers were not engines of ruin. They were an instrument designed to calibrate Angkor Wat to the equinox. Their burning was part of the design. I can show you how the temple was taught its axis. I gestured toward the reed and the bowl of water and the mirror. This is the same principle in miniature. Bhavadeva's nostrils flared. He slid 1 tiny step closer to the king. "Majesty," he said, in a voice that had both sweetness and iron, "this foreigner brings toys. The sun cares nothing for bowls. I bring the book of omens and the gnomon of truth." He lifted his palm leaf case as if it were a blade. Suryavarman did not look at him yet. He looked at me. "How long?" he asked. "Moments," I said. "Until the sun decides for us. Watch the beam." Mealea set the plumb bob gently against the reed. It stood true. The mirror waited. The bowl did not ripple. Divakara Pandita's eyes crinkled at the corners. He liked a proper experiment. While we waited the few breaths needed, I set the stage for the last act of this proof. I lifted my hand toward Bhavadeva's gnomon slightly, as if admiring it. He lifted his chin. I did not touch it. I did not need to. The resin smear he had left on the base would be enough. The clove oil scent from his charcoal would be enough. When men make their theatre too precise, the scents betray them. "Majesty," I said softly, "notice the smell on his scroll when he opens it. Clove oil. It is his workshop soot. It is a ritual perfume used by him. Notice also the resin smear his left thumb leaves when he anchors his portable gnomon. He is left-handed. That matters, because he now and before has set a test instrument a hair off true, and can do it the same way every time. A hair is enough at this scale. At the scale of the temple, it is a blame large enough to swallow a man." I did not accuse. I narrated. Kings prefer narrative when deciding. Bhavadeva sensed the attention shift and adjusted his smile by a degree. His brazier smoke thickened. He whispered a verse. His attendants swayed with him, a well-rehearsed wave. Suryavaman tilted his head once. The gesture said, "I hear you." It also said, "I will verify with my own senses." The light at the west gate brightened. The air changed, the way a room alters when a door opens to a larger world. A thin blade of sun came through, exactly as if a hand pushed it forward from beyond the horizon. The blade traveled along the floor. It met the mirror. The mirror sent it to the water. The water threw it back as a bright, trembling thread that slid across the stone, then paused, seeming to catch its breath with the rest of us. "Now," I said, not louder than a conversation, but enough to seat the moment. "Watch." Mealea moved the plumb one hair so the reed lay perfectly beneath the beam's center. The chalk in her other hand came down, light and quick, tracing the line the beam chose. The bright stripe kissed the reed's tip and then, obedient to the temple's bones, slipped onward, a pure line to the sanctuary's heart. It touched the axis knot where old marks lay like scars from a well-loved battle won years ago. I kept my body still and my breath long. Divakara Pandita kept his eyes on the place the light paused. Suryavarman did not move at all. He saw it. The thing he needed to see had appeared without being pulled by any man's rope. Bhavadeva opened his palm leaf scroll as if in a trance, to display his misalignment, to distract, to recenter the audience on his voice. The charcoal line glistened faintly where the oil had not quite dried. The scent of clove rose and met the king's nose. At the same time, the light met the axis. Some perfumes help you remember. Today, it would make him remember the wrong thing. I didn't speak then. I let light do the speaking. Words after light are like echoes, useful but weaker. The room was quiet except for a single drop of water touching the bowl's rim with a tick sound that felt more like a period than a splash. "Chalk the line," Suryavarman said. His voice was light itself. Mealea finished tracing. She stepped back and lowered her chin, but her eyes lifted. That small, bright, dangerous thing called hope stood in them. Bhavadeva flicked his gaze to his gnomon and then to the chalked path, then adjusted his jaw as if chewing on a pomegranate seed that he suddenly disliked. He took a step toward the portable gnomon and put his thumb to the base to show that it was anchored well. The resin sheen shone again for a tiny heartbeat. The king's eyes, dark and direct, dipped to that flash like a bird's to a fish in a stream. Then he looked at the scroll and smelled clove. Divakara Pandita spoke without warmth and without heat, a perfect, even tone that carried to both men. Majesty, you asked to be shown, not told. Here is what you asked for. The beam has found its mark on your axis. A scroll mixed with clove is less convincing than the sun. A smear pressed left is less honest than a plum allowed to rest. The king nodded once. It was enough. The nod said, prepare to act. It also said, we will finish this with calm. I took a breath. The plan for the final move stood ready. We would not be violent. We would simply hold up a mirror and let men see what they had done with their own hands, and we would ask for Vithu to be brought to watch his work, do what he had promised to hold true. Guards moved at a signal I did not see. The runner we had sent had already carried our request. Somewhere from a shaded doorway, the soft metal sound of a key thought about entering a lock. The sun rose another width. The beam brightened. The bowl's water seemed to smile. The air in the sanctuary, tense an hour ago, began to loosen as ropes do when the load is set down. We were not finished, but we could see the end from here. Bring Vidhu, Suryavarman said, voice even. He did not look at Bhavadeva when he said it. He looked at the sun. And now, as the footfalls of men carrying orders hurried away, the inspector's theatre smoke seemed to thin on its own. I kept my voice soft and unhurried. Majesty, when Vithu arrives, we will show him that his eightfold fire array held. And then, if you please, we will ask this inspector to hold his gnomon in his own manner once more, so that your eye can watch the left thumb's print appear on its base. Suryavarman did not smile, but his eyes said he felt a small private pleasure at the idea that truth could be so tidy. We waited. The sanctuary breathed with us. And just before the man we needed most was led through the west gate, I felt the case move from confusion toward clarity, with the gentle inevitability of water running downhill. The last task would be to let it finish without adding any more force than gravity already provided. Chapter 9, in which the sun speaks and silence wins. The sanctuary held its breath. It was still the hour before birds decide to try their voices. Stones swam in a faint grey. The lotus water outside was a darker band, unmoving. Within the heart of Angkor Wat, beneath towers that rose like 5 steady fingers, we gathered under the vault where sunlight would soon be asked a question and would answer without bias. Suryavarman II stood with a fighter's poise and a priest's quiet. He wore gold lightly, like a memory, not a boast. Divakara Pandita stood slightly behind him, palm leaf folios wrapped in a clean sash. Mealea held her breath as if I held the scene together with a thread she could not afford to jostle. Vithu was brought forward by 2 guards, thin, smoke-streaked, wrists bound but head inclined, with the calm of a man who has checked his measurements too often to trade them for fear. Bhavadev's copper brazier sat to one side, coals banked. a thin line of scented smoke climbing and bending in the morning's barely perceptible drift. He had unrolled an Omen scroll, the surface glossy in places, the charcoal lines dark and sure. He looked at the king and then at me with an expression that said the outcome was already written, and that I was a late falling leaf in a wind he believed he controlled. "Your Majesty," Bhavadeva intoned, voice even. "The gnomon indicates impurity. The beam is predicted to miss. The rite must be cleansed of its stain. The architect is at fault." He inclined his head toward Vithu without needing to look. It was a practiced gesture. I waited for the silence to thicken, then stepped forward. "With your permission," I said, my voice low so that calm itself would be a tool. "Let the sun answer for itself. Allow me a simple demonstration. No speeches, only light." Suryavarman II's gaze was steady. He lifted one hand by the smallest degree. Permission granted. I drew the bronze ring from my pocket, the Vishuva notch glinting lightly though the room was not yet lit. "This is a ring for the equinox," I said, so all could follow. Vishuva means equal day and night. It is inscribed with notches for the sun's height at the horizon. "This is Mealea. Her hands are steady." Mealea stepped near, without looking at Bhavadeva. "This is a reed cut to be straight. This is a bowl of water, because water tells the truth if asked gently. And there," I pointed to a pilaster that had seen 100 fires and 1,000 hands, "is one of Vithu's memory dots." I wiped the stone with the heel of my palm. A soot-ink speck, no larger than the head of an ant, looked back. It had been placed half a handspan below the capital's lip, where a shadow would pass and where a careful eye would see when to stop. Bhavadeva's nostrils flared. His thumb tightened on the scroll's edge. I set the reed gnomon upright at the remembered central point, an inconspicuous pit where the stone was faintly abraded from years of plumb lines. The base was not the portable platform, positioned by Bhavadeva's attendants earlier with its suspicious skew. This point was cut into the earth itself and recorded by hands who knew that tools do not argue with foundations. "Mealea," I said. She came beside me, her braid brushing the line of her shoulder. I placed the plumb bob in her palm. "Hold it and breathe like a pond, not a river." She smiled once and then turned the smile into a single inhale, the string drooping to true. The bowl of water I set slightly to the side, where any beam would strike it and reflect to the pilaster like a second tongue of light. I held the bronze ring so that its Vishuva notch faced the west gate. Angkor Wat, this great mountain of stone, faces west because it honors Vishnu, and because king and son have an appointment that happens only twice each year, when day and night are equal, and the beam threads the needle of the sanctuary. Across the floor, Bhavadeva lifted his Omen scroll higher. "Observe the misalignment traced here," he said, his voice pitched to carry. "It is a mark against heaven, or it is a mark against charcoal," I said, soft but clear. "If the charcoal is mixed with clove oil." Divakara Pandita shifted a fraction. The king's gaze did not move, but I felt it sharpen. I walked calmly to the scroll and, with the smallest respectful angle of my head to the king, held it near Bhavadeva's brazier for the heat, not the fire. The surface gleamed, the smell lifted, a sweetness that ghee lamps do not produce. Clove, a ritual scent used by those who want smoke to carry farther and hold longer. A scent of theatre, not workshop. Charcoal from the chisels, I said, smells like stone dust and lampblack. Charcoal steeped in clove oil glistens. It leaves a polish where it has no business being glossy. This scroll was prepared with scented charcoal. And the portable gnomon, I looked at the stand, with its base slightly canted, shows resin traces pressed from the left. A left hand, I reached and steadied the stand with 2 fingers, then lifted them back. The base had a faint tack. I held my fingertips up so all could see. The sheen on them caught the low light. Resin. When pressed over and over by a left thumb, it leaves this diagonal smear. I looked at Bavadeva's hands. He kept his left slightly behind the scroll, as if the motion were a secret. He did not blink. The 8-fold fire array was not defilement, I said, voice even. Addressed to the king, but for the room. It was an instrument built to die. 8 cross-shaped towers calibrated this temple's axis by creating marks that would remain when the towers did not. They were an enormous temporary gnomon. They were soaked in ghee and burned in a controlled rite. The vitrified sand out by the western spirals is the signature of heat done on purpose. The charred pegs mark placement. The earth remembers. After, the towers collapsed by design and were buried so that the living temple would carry no scaffolding, no impurity, only the memory. The misalignment on that scroll came from a moved gnomon and a perfumed charcoal, not from the sun. Suryavarman II allowed no emotion to leak to his face. He needed no help with that. He was trained to be weather. But his eyes returned to the west gate. So did mine. At the threshold of the west, the horizon's edge began to pearl. A thin, bright seam formed between the palm leaves and the sky. Under it, water in the moat accepted light without fuss. The monastery outside took its first breath of day. "Mealea," I said, steady. She had not moved. The plumb bob was a promise made vertical. The reed gnomon's shadow lay short and tight at its base. The blade of light at the gate grew. It crept along the stone, slow as a heartbeat heard through cloth. It touched the bronze ring where the Vishuva notch waited with patience. The ring warmed in my fingers, the notch brightened, and then the sliver passed. The beam traveled along the gallery. It was narrower than a man's hand. It was very sure of itself. It touched the rim of the water bowl and broke into a scatter that made the surface look like milled silver. That scatter brought a stripe to the paluster, fragile and brave. The stripe Clyde found the soot dot as if it had been told a story long ago and was simply acting it out. It crossed the sanctuary stone, moving like a slow silk ribbon, and then it kissed the axis knot on the floor, where 4 lines cut a perfect, quiet cross. It stopped there. The air, the day, every guard's breath, Bavadeva's scroll, Vithu's pulse, every measurable thing accepted the answer. Divakara Pandita's fingers tightened gently on his folios. He did not look at anyone. He looked at the stripe. "Auspicious," he said with no decoration on the word. Suryavarman II lifted his hand again, the same small gesture as before. The guards eased their grip on Vithu and then let go entirely. Vithu did not rub his wrists. He straightened, but kept his eyes on the lines at his feet, the way a man looks at a friend he thought he might never see again. I stepped to Bavadeva's portable gnomon. "One more thing," I said, as if asking for salt at a calm table. Please demonstrate your alignment. He moved with controlled care. He had enough dignity to try to carry it through. He reached with his left hand to steady the base. His thumb landed in precisely the place that left its diagonal. The resin took the print like wax. It shone. He adjusted the pole's angle by that tiny amount which is too small to notice until it is. The king did not need words. He watched the thumb's path, the resin shine, the angle shift. He saw the line it would throw, and he saw that it was wrong. Inspector Suryavarman said the word crisp without force. He turned his head the smallest measure toward a captain. The copper brazier was lifted, and its coals damped with water from the bowl Mealea had held. A hush of steam took the place where the braided smoke had been. Bhavadeva lowered his eyes. His face didn't change. He removed the seal of his office from his sash and set it on a carved ledge with a flat palm. He had done this before for others. He knew the movements. He looked at the king. My zeal overran my discipline, he said. It was the closest a man in his position could come to apology without dissolving. Suryavarman's answer was a steady gaze, no cruelty, no softness. Light is a weapon, he said. It is a witness. Let it witness that this temple is true. He looked to Divakara Pandita. Record what was done in the field with fire. Record that the 8 are foundations, that crimes. Mealea's arms trembled then, but with relief, not strain. She set the plumb bob down gently as if it might break. Vithu lifted his head and his eyes found mine for the first time. He did not smile fully. He did not need to. The corner of his mouth made a different kind of line. I breathed dough. It felt like setting a heavy box down on a floor that would hold it for centuries. The beam dimmed as the sun climbed and spread. The sanctuary filled with ordinary morning light. It had done its job with clean hands. Master of measures, I said softly to Vithu, the towers kept their promise in the ground, and you kept the air honest. He replied, voice almost gone, so the ground could speak. Divakara Pandita touched my sleeve. Friend of an hour, he said in a gentle voice that had officiated coronations and comforted villages, eat with us when the chanting finishes. The day has arrived properly. I nodded, and then looked one last time at the axis knot on the floor. If a listening person placed a fingertip there, they could feel the temple's alignment like a pulse. Chapter 10, in which ashes remember and morning returns. The noise that followed was not noise. It was a hum, like bees moving through tall grass. Work resumed without argument. It was the sound of people who know what to do and have been allowed to continue doing it. Vithu stepped from the center and went at once to the drafting hall. I walked with him down the gallery, where Devas and Asuras forever pull the serpent in the churning of the sea of milk. Their eyes did not change. They did not need to. They had watched alignments come and go, cyclones, kings, monsoons. They tugged now as they had tugged when the first chisel bite woke this wall. In the hall, palm leaf rolls were unfurled, weights set at their corners like small sleeping animals. Chalk dust hung in the air in a way that made its own sunlight. Mealea took her place at a board and drew a single line that had been waiting behind her eyes since last night. It was straight because it had truth on one side and stone on the other. Vithu's tools were returned to him in a small bundle, soot-smudged silk wrapped around the plumb bob, the bronze ring nested inside like a coin in a palm. He lifted the ring with both hands, not because it was heavy, but because his hands had been denied it. He touched the Vishuva notch with one finger and then set the ring near the lamp so the metal warmed as it had warmed in my hand. He did not look at Parvadeva, who stood in a shadow by the door, watching without authority now. There was no humiliation in the room, only work. Divakara Pandita composed his record with the precision of a man setting a beam across two columns. He spoke as he wrote so that the scribes could copy without confusion. 8 cross-shaped towers, he said, stylus tapping lightly on the palm leaf, raised to the measure of the cubit, anointed with ghee, fired by ritual to cure the earth's memory, collapsed by intent, buried with reverence. Their positions correspond to the westward calibration spirals. Purpose, instrument retired. Verdict, auspicious. A young runner came and knelt at the door. He waited until he was seen. His Majesty requests that the foundations be marked, not erased, he said, voice barely above the draft's whisper. He also asks that the names of the builders be written by them on the underside of the next stone to be laid. The boy's eyes were bright. He would have a story to tell his mother tonight. Mealea let out a breath she had not noticed she held. Master, she whispered to Vithu, your name under the stone. Vithu shook his head once. Our names, he said. He looked at her, chalk-smeared temple, the neat string of measuring knots at her wrist. All of ours, the 8 who set the fires, the 6 who raked the spirals, the teams who carried the pegs, the young woman who held the line steady when it could not waver. He glanced at me, and the visitor who listened for resin and clove. I gave him a small bow and found the edge of a smile. I will not be here when the next stone is set, I said, but if you write the ring itself into a groove, it will feel familiar when someone touches it. Centuries from now. He nodded. We have always built for hands we will never meet. We walked the western edge of the moat then, where the spirals lay in the fields like sleeping dragons. Curves engraved in the earth itself, too large to see from one place and too simple to grasp without walking them. Under the rising sun, the damp paths shone. Dragonflies stitched the air with straight lines in contrast to the land's long arcs. I knelt at one curve where last night's ash still made a pale ghost on the ground. I pinched a bit of vitrified sand from the surface and rolled it between my fingers. It had cooled overnight. It was glass because no ordinary cooking fire does that to a field. Only focused heat, on purpose, would have done it. The bead clicked softly against my fingernail. I placed it back on the earth. Keep your records, I murmured to no one, or to the ground. You do it well. Across the water, the tower's stones softened under full morning. The great lintels no longer looked like teeth, but like shoulders. A flock of birds decided then to try a few notes. The sound lifted and fell in strips like woven cloth. Near the drafting hall, a pair of guards took down the post that had been hammered into the ground for an execution that would now not happen. They set it aside without comment. A worker used the newly freed patch of earth to lay out a stack of laterite bricks to dry. Nothing wasted. No emphasis. When danger passes in a place that has seen many dangers, relief is practical. Divakara Pandita met me at the base of the causeway. You found the simplest path between arguments, he said. Light does not bruise. It simply shows where the bruises are. Light is good at that, I said. I let my eyes follow the causeway forward. You have a king who trusts his eyes and the stillness of a bowl of water. The elder's lips turned in a brief smile. He has had to. Factions do not ask permission to be born. But he prefers proofs that do not bleed. Bhavadeva approached us then. His seal was gone from his sash. His brazier had been claimed by a novice who was cleaning it with river sand. He stopped at a respectful distance. I will study again, he said, voice bare. I shaped smoke too confidently. Shape your breath first, Divakara Pandita said, that unkind. Then the smoke will behave. He tilted his head. Walk the spirals. They will not flatter you. Bhavadeva inclined his head, and for a long heartbeat, he was only a man relieved of a burden he had mistaken for honor. He turned and followed a path that cut toward the fields. Mealea came running, not fast, just with a lightness in the feet that was new. She held out the soot-streaked silk. Master Snorelock, she said, trying the name as if it were part of a chant. The plumb bob needs a new string. Would you like the old one? I have something for it to remember, I said. I took the silk, feeling the weight of the small bob. When I return, I will tie it where the air is quiet. Vithu walked up then and placed the bronze ring in my other hand for a moment. Not to give, but to make a point. A ring must travel to remain a circle, he said. Walk with it to the gate and back. I did. The stone under my feet had the give of age but the assurance of purpose. I reached the west gate, looked outward at the world. The temple faced water's broad line. The palms, the distant green, and then turned back into the precinct where all of that had been turned into measured steps and true walls. Time was not a straight line here. It moved like the sunbeam. It was narrow and accurate when asked, and wide and forgiving when not. When the chanting eased and the work swallowed the morning, I felt the drawer of waking slide open somewhere behind me. The air in the sanctuary thinned. Smells rearranged themselves. The sound of cicadas went quiet in my ear as another sound took its place. Rain on a window, the domestic kind that makes a room feel smaller and kinder. I stood once more at the axis knot. Thank you, I said, to no one or to the stone, for letting a visitor carry a line for a while. The stripe of sun had spread. It was no longer a blade. The temple's heart had nothing left to prove. Neither did I. The room softened, and in a gentle pivot, the water bowl became the cup on my desk. The reed became the pen in my fingers, and the Vishuva ring became a circle of light on the wood where the morning sun searched for a place to land. Penelope's old beagle sigh rose under the chair like a familiar tide. I was back. The charred shard lay where I had left it. This time, its groove made a different sort of sense. I lifted the piece and held it up to my window. The morning light in my world found the groove cleanly. It sat there like a key in a lock. On the back, the faint scratch view was darker. Soot settled into its cut. I pressed the plumb bob silk against the shard and tied it with a simple knot. The bob hung and stilled, and the line made the smallest click against the desk as if pleased to be assigned again. I placed the shard where the ring of sunlight would visit it each morning. A ritual of my own, small, clear, not in need of applause. Rain drew its lines down the glass. The kettle breathed contentment. The wind down. The case had folded itself neatly and put itself away, like a set of tools wiped with oil and wrapped in cloth. There was nothing left to solve, only things to notice while the world became very quiet around you and me. Listen to the rain. It does not hurry. It arrives in small, even taps, like fingers greeting a tabletop in thought. Some drops find the sill and drum a softer rhythm. Others catch on the edge of the pane and hang, round and clear, until gravity remembers them and draws them down. In the gaps between drops, there is a plain silence. That silence is kind. In that silence, imagine the western causeway of Angkor Wat under first light. The stone warms slowly. The moat is wide and very still. Lotus leaves float like little shields misplaced and not in a rush to be found. They lift when a fish turns beneath them and settle again. A single dragonfly writes a straight thread through the damp air, then veers and draws a second line that makes a quiet cross over an invisible point. The point is important to anyone but the dragonfly. That is enough. Imagine the galleries cool and dim now, that the morning's narrow beam has turned into a general glow. The carvings on the walls are patient. They do not need you to look at them. They will be there when you feel like it. The Apsaras smile without intent. Their hands are small. Their fingers are long. Their wrists hold an arc that is restful to follow with your eyes. If you trace that curve softly in your mind from one figure to the next, you will notice your breath follow the same slow shape. In the fields beyond the moat, the spirals lie quiet. They are not puzzles to be solved now. They are paths a child could run, then walk, then sit in the center and listen to birds. The ash from last night's fires has disappeared into the earth. The earth keeps no grudges. It remembers without insisting. Back in this room, Penelope has found a comfortable curl of herself near the hearth. Her nose twitches once, then stills. Her paws make a small running motion in a dream about a younger day's field. The sound she makes is almost a sigh, almost a purr. It sits in the corner like a warm blanket. The kettle no longer hisses, it breathes. The chair under you is honest. It does not lie about what it is. It holds you in a way that does not ask you to do anything at all. The blanket over your legs pulls a little at the edge where it falls, and that small weight is a reminder that gravity has you and always will. You are not responsible for holding yourself up when you are tired. The room and the chair and the quiet are doing that work, and they are paid in silence. If your mind wanders to the demonstration, let it wander the way sunlight wanders down a wall, slowly, lightly, with no need to arrive at the same place twice. Imagine the bowl of water, again surface flat, then touched by a thin line of light, then gently tossing that light to the stone as if playing a simple game. The water is a truthful friend. It tells you where light is. It tells you when you can rest. It says, "You have shown enough for today." Let your breath be like the water. Let it take what arrives and spread it evenly. In through the nose, out through the mouth, easy as the turning of a page. If the mind brings you a thought, place it like a small tool on a cloth. Wrap it and set it aside for the morning. There will be more light then. The thought will not spoil overnight. The rain leans a little harder now, then eases, then settles into a pattern that matches the slow beat of your heart. If you listen closely, you might hear another rhythm, memory of the monk's chant far away. Not words, just a low ribbon of sound that rises and falls and does this urge you to follow it. You can let it pass under you like a river. You remain on the bank where the grass is soft. Your shoulders have time to be heavy. Your jaw has permission to drop a little. Your tongue can rest against the roof of your mouth, nowhere in particular. Your eyelids might feel cool on their inner surface, as if a small breeze is moving there. Your hands are ready to unclench without ceremony. Even your thoughts find a place to sit down and look at something quiet, maybe the way the sun once a year threads a hole in a stone wall, or the way a beagle's ear flops just so when she breathes out. In the far distance, in a different country and a different century, the 8 places in the ground where towers once stood are content. They know they did their duty. They know no one will bother them now. A few roots thread through the ash. A worm turns the soil. Nothing in the world is rushing them. They return to being earth, which is what most things prefer to be when they are not needed. There is nothing left to worry over tonight. The innocent man was spared. The temple stands. The sun is on time. The seal that needed to be lifted was lifted. The record was written cleanly. Light was treated like a witness, not a weapon. That is enough achievement for any day. When you are ready, you may let your breathing grow longer and your thoughts grow shorter. The room will keep its watch. The rain will hold the window down. Penelope will count sheep for the both of us. And if you drift and wake and drift again, that is all part of the same safe river. Good night, friend. Close your eyes. Let the world align itself without your help for a while. It knows how.